Hello and welcome to this More Than Commas. My name is Paul Adams. I'm the CEO and founder of Sound Financial Group, and I'm here today with an incredible episode. So before we get into it, be sure to like and subscribe. And during the episode, if you get questions, etc., put them in the comments below. Feel free to put them in your reviews, and we will get them answered on a future episode. Now, on this episode today, we have Jeremy Ames with Guidant Financial. And what Guidant Financial does is helps folks be able to start a business using their retirement plans. So with that, I am super happy to introduce my longtime friend, Jeremy Ames. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be here.
Well, it's so good to have you. So maybe just to kick off and let people know a little bit of background as to how Guidant works. How do people take a 401k and turn it into a business? Maybe just give us the big opening and broad picture about how your business works and how it helps people.
I will try and make this as simple as possible. And maybe I'll just tell our origin story as part of doing that.
Yeah.
So in 2002, I owned a real estate brokerage, and it was focused on helping people in the investment real estate world. And through that, I met my business partner of 22 years. And we started doing some real estate investment projects together. And one of those projects that we did was a raw land development over on the peninsula in Washington State, over by the Navy base. Mm-hmm. And we went and met with this group of attorneys because we needed to set up the entity structures to do our fundraising. And we wanted to do it like dominoes, right? Where we'd fund each individual plat and we'd start construction on it and then move on to the next one. And these attorneys said, hey, have you considered allowing self-directed IRA investors to participate as part of this investment? And we said, what are you talking about? Which is funny because, I mean, we spent so much time in the real estate investment community in Seattle at the time. I mean, we were going to all the meetings and even speaking at some of the meetings, and we had never heard of this. So we said, well, teach us. And so they taught us a little bit about it. We went out to our network and we got 2/3 of the funding for that project through people's self-directed retirement plans. Of course, they didn't actually have those self-directed retirement plans. They had their money at some traditional investment manager like you, Paul. Mm-hmm. And so we said, oh, we know some people that can help with this. We've got these attorneys we've been working with. We can totally handle it. And what we learned pretty quickly, besides A, no one knew you could do this, was B, it was really confusing and it was complex and it was scary to think about making a mistake here when you're talking about, potentially hundreds of thousands of other people's money. And we walked away from that experience saying, maybe we should just put the investment stuff on the shelf and figure out how to make this more accessible to investors, because we thought this thing was magic. But the only businesses we had experience with in that industry were either banks or custodians or attorneys. And guess what? None of those people speak English.
Yes.
They speak English for the normal person, the normal business owner who's trying to accomplish a particular outcome. And so we thought there was a huge opportunity here to try and simplify it, communicate it to people, and help them find a simpler structure for how to do it. And that's how we started the company. And pretty quickly, what we found was about 10% of the people that came to us were people who wanted to buy a business that they would actively run. And you can't do that inside of a self-directed IRA. We had a great multi-paragraph explanation that we would give to people when they would call in as leads when they wanted to invest in a business they were part of. And one day, pretty early in the company's history, a lead, I think David was talking to him, the lead said, well, yeah, I can. I've been working with this CPA attorney in California, and here's what he told me. And so we, of course, got all the information we could from this guy and looked into it. And when we took a peek at it, we thought, this seems credible, but we're not ERISA attorneys. So we went out and we hired an ERISA attorney, and we said, we want you to evaluate this and tell us, is this legitimate? Can you actually do this? Because either we need to update our explanation around why you can't do it, or, we need to embrace this because this is a huge need that people are coming to us for. And the attorney came back and said, yeah, absolutely, you can do this. This has been happening since ERISA went live in 1974. He's like, it's just been primarily done by high net worth attorneys. We would come later to learn that there is a $1 billion IRA that exists in the world. It's owned by a guy named Peter Thiel. You might have heard of him.
Yes.
You can take a guess how he got a $1 billion IRA. He didn't get it because he saved a lot of money in his retirement plan.
He didn't get that $6,000 a year just discipline investing in a Robinhood account.
Well, let me be clear. I don't actually know how he got it, but I have a pretty good idea of how he got it. And I think
Yeah.
it has something to do with something that rhymes with stay now. So we embraced that. In fact, that attorney that we hired to do the review, we actually made him a job offer. We said, come on board at Guidant and help us build this thing out to really do this in a way that makes sense, make it simpler for people and make it safe for people to invest in these businesses. And that came to dominate what we did as a company, so much so that we sold off the real estate side of what we did and really doubled down on serving the small business owners. And now, 21 plus years later, we've helped more than 30,000 people launch businesses all over the United States and every US territory using what's called Rollovers for Business Startups.
Well, and if you can, because I know some of your customers are open about you sharing about who they are and how they got started, can you give some folks an idea of what kind of businesses can be started and maybe an example of a few of those before we get into the mechanics?
Yeah, let me just draw a couple from recent podcast interviews I've done. I just interviewed a guy today who was a pharmacist for 40 years, and he was 62. He at first was in pharmacy management, and he got so frustrated with this push to enforce this culture of accountability that he didn't buy into and didn't believe in. So he stepped back to just do the pharmacy work again. But he was in Baltimore, and it was a really, I think the pharmacy he worked in got burned down and had to be rebuilt over a year. And he said he was used to every day and every week people coming in and yelling at him. He was done. But he wasn't done from the standpoint of wanting to be done, being relevant and being out there doing something. In fact, he said to me that, his wife's parents retired when they were 60 or something like that. And then they ended up dying like 6 years later because they deteriorated mentally, they deteriorated physically. And he contrasted that with his own dad, who's 89 years old today and still kicking. He said, hey, I talked to my dad earlier today. He's about to go golfing, who, was staying active and being relevant. And so this guy was done with it. And just on a whim, on one of his, what he called quit days, he decided he would search up bed and breakfasts in the Baltimore area. And he came across this consulting company and then went to a seminar. And then, many, many, many steps later, he ended up buying a bed and breakfast with his wife that has given them a different lease on life and a different lifestyle that they love. So that's one example of a sort of lifestyle type business. Another example of a client that I've talked to in the not too distant future, Sean Moore, is another one that I love. Because Sean Moore was your typical corporate badass. This guy got things done for many, many years, was able to sock a lot of money away in his retirement account, and had this dream for his whole life of wanting to be a business owner. But as he became more successful, the golden handcuffs got tighter, right? He made more and more money. Then he had a young family and a wife that stopped working. And so there was more and more pressure on him to take care of everything for the family. He just didn't know how he would do it. And he stumbled across what we do with Rollovers for Business Startups. And that unlocked a whole new opportunity for him, because all of a sudden he said, well, wait a second, I got $1 million in my retirement plan. If I use this with an SBA loan, I can go buy a $5 million business. That $5 million business can afford to pay me enough to continue my lifestyle as it is and still give me the control I want, the autonomy I want, the flexibility to decide when and how I work, and still have the upside.
Well,
so those two good enough examples, component. Or do you want me to keep going?
That is a really good 2 examples, but I might want a couple more.
Okay.
Before you do, I'm thinking about that SBA can be coordinated with the ROBS transaction.
Yes.
So incidentally, ROBS, everybody, stands for Rollovers for Business Startups.
Correct.
So with that, you can do, say, $1 million into the business and still get SBA financing on top of it.
Correct. Because the way that it works is your retirement plan is not lending you money. It's becoming an angel investor in your business. It's becoming a shareholder. It owns stock. So what we do as a company is we're jumping through all the hoops that need to happen transactionally
Mhm.
to make that stock purchase happen and have it fit the IRS guidelines. And then ongoing, as the 401k and Rob's compliance administrator, we are helping manage all the stuff that needs to happen every year with the IRS and the Department of Labor to make sure that those funds stay and can continue to be reported as retirement assets. So what's happening now is instead of you having stock in Microsoft or Tesla or Nvidia, you've got stock in Paul Adams Inc. And you can go out and do all sorts of businesses with that as long as they're federally legal and not the investment of capital.
So starting a new business would qualify.
Correct.
Being able to buy a franchise where you're kind of buying into somebody else's.
I'll tell you this, Paul, here are the three things that we see most often. Somebody who's doing a startup, often someone who's already started a sort of side gig and then is getting to the point where they need to ramp up production to go to the next level. So I'll give you an example. We had a longtime client who his passion and his hobby was viticulture. So he had, he worked as a parole officer, but over time he had purchased a piece of land in this up and coming wine region, and he started to grow his own grapes and bottle his own stuff. But he got to the point where he wanted to be done with his job as a parole officer. But he knew to do that, he would have to ramp up his production like 10x. And that was going to require all this expensive machinery and equipment. And so he used a Rollover for Business startup as a way to bring that capital in to buy that equipment and jump from like a side hobby business into something that was full time. So that's one example of a startup. I'll give you another example of a startup. A client I talked to a few weeks ago, her name was Catherine Ernst. So she was someone who was a corporate executive for a lot of years. She ended up being a CFO of a legal firm. And she left the workforce for a little while to take care of her kids. And when she tried to go back in, she couldn't quite get a role that she was either excited about or that really represented what she was worth out there in the world. Well, it just so happens for many, many years, Catherine had been living with both gluten and dairy sensitivities. And she found it so incredibly annoying when she's out and about with the kids to find any place she can go to eat because A, the food was garbage that was gluten-free and dairy-free. And B, there's like one option on the menu. It's like, would you like this option or the same option? And so she started experimenting with recipes in her kitchen and to find some things that she liked. And so when she found out about Rollovers for Business Startup, she said, this is it. I want to actually create the thing that I wish existed. And so she went out and she built what was originally a cafe to do gluten-free and dairy-free items. Well, that turned into two cafes, a bakery, and now she's got a proprietary flour blend that she uses and that they're starting to sell. So that's the startup.
All came from her 401k.
It all came from her 401k. And now her husband actually is in the business. So once the business got to a certain scale, then her husband came over. In fact, when I was talking to them, the cool part about their story is the first year they thought they were just going to have people come into the cafe. But the first year for Thanksgiving, they had people coming to them saying, can you help us for the holidays? We got to go to these family events and there's nothing I can eat at Thanksgiving. And so for like 13 clients, she made some gluten-free, dairy-free pies for them. I think last year they did 1,400 for Thanksgiving. So they have to like make these things months in advance and freeze them in this industrial size freezer because the amount that they have to produce in a small window of time is so huge. So those are two examples of startup stories. Franchises is another one. People who are using it to, start and buy new franchises that they, build up and grow out. So I just talked to a guy the other day who purchased a couple of Stretch Lab licenses. And then he bought them right before COVID. Great timing, right? So right before COVID, he buys these two franchise licenses and he's like already negotiated his lease with the landlord. And now he's like, well, you can't open. But what they did was they had something written in their lease where they could use this section of the parking lot. So they set up this outdoor, like canopied area that was awesome for advertising. And people would come in and they would give them a free, 30-minute stretch, and they got an opportunity to experience it. And then what he also did was he started pre-selling people. He's like, if you sign up for a membership here, then when we open, I'll give you free stretches up until the time that we open. And then when we open, you'll start on the subscription and it'll look like this. And he signed up, I don't know how many people, but that's what really kickstarted him. It ended up taking him like 5 months to open. Thankfully, he was in California and not Sheboygan, so he was able to do some of that work outside. But that's an example of a new franchise piece. And then the other one we often see are the business acquisitions. Somebody who's going out and buying a business, usually for under $6 million. A client I talked to the other day, he actually worked at PayPal. He went to college with Max Lebkin, so this is the funny PayPal connection. So he worked with Max for a while, and then he ended up at LinkedIn, and he had done a couple, because he was in the startup world in Silicon Valley. He had done a couple startups of his own. They had failed miserably. And then I think in 2016, he had this idea for, hey, I'm going to go out and buy a franchise. And so he went out and bought a couple licenses to Bishop's, which is like a barbershop and hair place that you can get stuff done. And it took him a long time to get those. He originally bought it as sort of passive income, and it was not passive at all. He was spending like 30 hours a week on it, but he finally got it to break even. And then COVID hit. And so he sold one of them for pennies on the dollar. The other one, he just sort of let go and closed. And at the same time, LinkedIn laid him off. So what I love about this guy is like, he didn't care. He was ready. He was in. So he decided, okay, I'm going to go out and buy a business. The one thing he hadn't done yet. He'd done the franchise. He'd done the startup. I'm going to go buy a business. But because of all this experience he had this really interesting thought process of how to go through it. So he decided to build a program where he scraped some data from the SBA, and he looked at all the default rates. And what he was looking for is he wanted to show me the businesses that have the lowest default rates. And then I want to look at those business industries and say, which of these industries is recession proof? Which of these things are still going to be relevant and people are going to pay for even when the economy's down? And he landed on two areas. One was home services repair, and the other was auto repair. Keep in mind, this is an engineer. That's what he does for a trade, right? He's a programmer. So he decides he's going to look for these businesses. And then he determines like, hey, I don't know how many of these there are in my area. So I need to think about all the places I'd be willing to move to start one of these businesses. And so he negotiates with his wife all these places they'd be willing to move. And he builds this program that leverages Google search and a couple other things to pull in all these names into a database. And he just starts cold emailing these people that have these businesses. Hey, would you be interested in selling? Ultimately, he ended up buying, I think for around, he ended up only paying, I think, $150,000 or something for an auto repair business that was doing almost $1 million. But he saw major opportunity in because it was kind of dingy. It wasn't well taken care of. The guys were really underpriced. So he bought this business. It's now doing more than $2 million in revenue. He's working 1 day a week, and now he's looking at opening, location number 2 and location number 3. So is that enough examples yet?
I think that is phenomenal. Okay. That gives everybody a really good sense of how it works. What can go wrong?
This episode is brought to you by Sound Financial Group. At Sound Financial, we specialize in helping clients build strong, long-term financial strategies for their retirement. If you're looking for personalized advice to help manage your wealth, visit us at sfgway.com to learn more about how we can help you achieve your goals.
I think there are 2 things I would point out. One is super obvious. If you buy a horrible business or a business that's a horrible fit for you, things are going to go badly, right?
And that's true with retirement account money.
And it doesn't matter.
Non-retirement account money.
And by the way, it's equally true if you go out there and only get an SBA loan, because the SBA is going to lien your house. And I mean, it's not like you're going to walk away and not have any implications. Like, there is risk involved with a business. And so it's super, super important that you find the business that is the right fit for you. And it's not always self-evident. No one would have thought, oh, this engineer is going to go out and buy an auto repair business. But it's a brilliant, brilliant fit, because there were already employees that knew how to do the auto repair side. But what they weren't good at was marketing. They weren't good at the financing piece. They weren't good at the pricing piece. These are all things he knew how to do. So he was able to bring that to the business and supercharge it. So that's one. The second is, you do something stupid that you're not supposed to do in terms of the guidelines around what the IRS requires. Like, here's the most obvious one. You decide, oh, I don't need a 401k administrator that specializes in this. I'll just handle this myself, or I'll just have my CPA Joe do it. He's done a 5,500 once in his life before. We should just have him do it. And I would just tell people, it's not about the paperwork of doing the 5,500. The 5,500 is just a bunch of numbers on a sheet. It's about all the things you're looking for with how the plan is operating that can create problems. And those are things we've tried to package all of that together. There's, as you know, because you're in the business, Paul, there's a whole list of things you have to do every year as a 401k administrator, just base for any 401k plan.
Yes.
Okay. Then on top of that, there's a number of other things that need to be done from a ROBS compliance standpoint that don't apply to normal 401k plans. So for example, you have to value the business every year. Well, why? Well, because you have to give a reporting to the IRS and the DOL about how much money, how much assets are held by the retirement plan. And so you have to know what that business is worth. Now you can go out and get a several $1,000s appraisal if you want. But for our clients, we bundle in and we do an estimated business value that meets the requirements of the IRS, but that allows us to sort of put a legitimate number on there that has a consistent methodology year over year. Audit protection is the other thing. So I believe we're the only company in the industry that pays for outside audit representation in the case that your plan gets audited. So I will just say, every 401k plan, regardless of how well you manage it, is susceptible to being audited by the IRS. It can happen to anybody. When you do, please never represent yourself in front of the IRS. It's kind of like representing yourself in court. Seems like, well, I could save some money.
I would say in front of any government agency.
Yeah, because guess what? Because guess what? They don't work for you. They work for the U.S. government, and their job is to get as much as legally possible from you in tax revenue. That's their job. That's what they get evaluated on in audits. And so, we decided long ago that we were going to pay for outside representation for two reasons. One, the worst thing that can happen is a client of one of these rollovers trying to explain to the IRS what they think they did. Because no matter how many years you've been doing it for, I promise you, it's more complex on the back end than you can think. Our clients don't have to worry about it. That's how we handle making sure that part's taken care of. The second piece is these audits can cost up to $50,000 in terms of how much time and effort and energy goes into them. And so it's a way that we align our interests with our clients so that we have every incentive possible to keep both the audit rate low and to make sure there are very few, if any, issues that come up with these plans. And it drives so many other things that happen in our business. So for example, I was talking to that client today who bought the bed and breakfast. Mm-hmm. And it looks like they might put it out to market sometime in the next year or two. And so, he asked me a couple questions about, what that would look like. We have built in for our clients as part of our process what we do for that, because when that time comes, they are going to need to have an attorney that understands the implications of ROBS and the implications of selling to help them make sure that the dollars go the right places. And so, we handle all the things that we can handle without being lawyers that represent individuals. And then we have, as part of our ecosystem, attorneys that we pay for often. For cases like this, we allocate up to an hour a year for clients to meet with attorneys to have those kind of discussions to make sure that they get what they need to move forward and do it well. Because at the end of the day, our job is to help people protect their retirement funds. That's what they're paying us for. They think they're paying us to file some paperwork with the IRS. But at the end of the day, what we're really here for is to make sure that $1 million that Sean Moore invested in the art dealership that he paid $5 million for stays an asset of his retirement plan. So when he sells that company, all of the proceeds that are owned by his retirement account go back into his retirement plan and can continue to grow tax deferred. Because as you know, Paul, the key to a retirement plan is that because you're controlling when you take distributions from the retirement plan, you control the tax bracket that you operate in. And that is hugely important when you think about maximizing how many of the dollars you're able to use versus how many of the dollars Uncle Sam is able to use.
So speaking of that, tell everyone about Roth 401k.
Yeah, Roth can be a little confusing for people because here's the thing. You can use Roth 401k funds to invest in a rollover for business startups. You can't use Roth IRA funds because you can't roll Roth IRA funds into a 401k. But you can if you're saving. And so I would encourage anybody, if you have a 401k right now, you think you might ever do this at some point, put it in Roth 401k. I know you're a big proponent of that. And I will also tell you that $1 billion IRA owned by Peter Thiel, guess what kind of IRA account it is?
ROTH.
Yeah. So he's doing all right.
Yeah.
He's going to be okay when he retires.
Yeah. He could struggle through, as they say.
Yeah. He'll be fine.
So we can use Roth, which means grow a business, sell a business, have all tax-free proceeds.
Depending on how you sell it. So there are two ways that small businesses sell. You can sell via a stock sale or you can sell via an asset sale. If you sell as a stock sale, you're absolutely right. Right? Your retirement, your Roth retirement, your Roth 401k, selling stock to a third party, that's not going to create any tax. It's going to all flow back into the Roth. And then at some point you can roll it out and then decide when you want to take those funds and those proceeds. Now, if it's an asset sale where you're selling the assets of the business, then the dollars will get returned into the C corporation. The C corporation will pay their, tax rate, which I believe is a flat 21%.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could distribute, to the shareholders pro rata, the rest of the proceeds.
Right on. So there'll be some importance in the way you set up that sale one day to get the maximum amount tax-free.
Huge. And that's why it's super important. If you're somebody who's going to do a roll-up for business startups, make sure the CPA that you work with knows what they're doing in relation to ROBs. And let me give you one great litmus test to do that. You have to use a C corporation for a ROBs because you're going to have this owner that's not a human. It's a 401k plan. It's a trust, essentially, in the grand scheme of the legislation. And so it can't be an S corp. But every CPA that has been raised in the last 40 years thinks every small business should be an S corp. That's what they're comfortable with. That's what they know. That's what they understand. And that's what they will try and convert you to. So if your CPA says to you, yes, I totally understand ROBs, and then the next thing out of their mouth is, we just got to get you out of the C corp as soon as possible, you should run for the freaking hills, because that person is going to put your plan in jeopardy.
Yeah, great point. Well, let me share, if I may, what I think is a bit of a conspiracy and just get your thoughts on it. And I think what you've been sharing with us really gives clients and our listeners the opportunity to maybe circumvent this. And that is that every employer that has, say, a highly productive employee working for them, somebody who's both earning good money and perhaps is somebody like the greatest revenue producer or profit producer within an enterprise.
Yep.
And as they get their employees contributing most of their money for their retirement to the 401k, they're simultaneously making sure an employee doesn't save money on their own balance sheet that could ever let them leave, at least before age 59 and a half.
Yeah, well, I'm not as diabolical as you, so I haven't thought of it in that particular way, really, ever. I don't know if it's some grand conspiracy, but I mean, certainly as a business owner, there's strategy in why and how we invest in our team through our 401k. And it's just, you can create a vesting schedule that has some incentive for people to want to stick around. But the reality is, once someone's been at your company for 5+ years, they're going to be 100% vested in that anyway. So, but yeah, I hadn't thought about the fact, because that is one thing that happens for a lot of our clients, like Sean Moore, the one I talked about earlier. His benefits on the 401k side, the matching that his company did was so strong that he put every available bit he could into his, that's why he had $1 million in his 401k plan. But it also meant he didn't have the cash outside. So this dream he had of a business, he always thought, I wasn't going to be able to afford it, until he saw the path to ROBs, which opened the door to, okay, now I combine this with what I know about SBA loans, and now we're cooking. Now I can buy something that's big enough to employ me and to grow something meaningful that I can be excited about.
Well, and if somebody's listening now and they've got a bunch of money in an IRA, it's not in a 401k right now, they can still do this, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just the Roth IRAs.
It's not the Roth. You wouldn't want to convert, because I believe, and you probably know this better than me, but I believe with a Roth IRA, if you try and roll it into a 401k, it becomes like traditional. So it defeats the purpose.
We've never had to roll one in.
Yeah, well, it's probably because it's a really bad deal and no one wants to do it.
Exactly right. Well, this is what I want to make sure everybody leaves with. Number one, Jeremy, want you to be able to share, how do people find Guidant? What
Sure.
guide or whatever should they download from your website? And
Sure.
then tell everybody a little bit about your podcast, because some of them might want to learn more about this than what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the way to find Guidant is you have to learn how to spell it. That's the challenge. That is the puzzle breaker that you've got to work your way through. So it's
We'll put it in the description.
It's Guidant. I've heard it called all sorts of things. Guidant is my favorite, maybe, of the list. But we did the branding 22 years ago, so we may have missed the mark. But I think directionally, it describes what we do and what people are looking at us to do for them. So guidantfinancial.com, Guidant financial.com. For people who want to learn more about this, we have a complete guide to ROBS. It's a very dense packet of information that will tell you everything you want to know and don't want to know about rollovers for business startups. We think it's really important that people are educated and understand what they're walking into. It's a really powerful tool for building wealth and for opening the door to business ownership, but it does come with requirements that you have to meet. And while we can handle many of those for clients as it relates to paperwork, there are restrictions and things that you have to live within. And I'll give you an example that comes up frequently. Somebody wants to buy a piece of real estate that the business is going to lease.
Mm-hmm.
And what people generally want to do is they want to buy that building, let's say, personally. They want to go get some debt from the bank. They want to buy it personally, and then they want to lease it back to the business. And usually they want to jack up how much the business is paying on this lease so that they can create this other passive income stream. You can't do it in that way. The way you have to do it is the ownership of the building has to be somewhere in the C Corp structure. So usually what clients do is they'll set up a separate underlying LLC that's 100% owned by the C Corp. That LLC will buy the building, and then the LLC will lease it to the business. So you can still go out and buy the building. You can still go out and use the same type of debt financing. What you can't do is create a situation where there is a high likelihood of you abusing the 401k's ownership, because that's what the IRS is paying attention to. This exemption essentially to the general prohibited transactions exists in the same way that it exists for ESOPs, because the government presumably wants to incentivize people to invest in business, because business goes out and creates jobs. It creates value in the economy. So even though the IRS isn't getting their money now, they're going to get their money. They're always going to get their money.
Every time.
So, you have to be able to live within those restrictions, and you can understand that by downloading the complete guide for ROBS. And then, when and if you get to the point, usually I recommend to people, because they'll say, what point do I want to connect with Guidant? And I would say, usually there are 2 points in time you want to connect. The first one is when you're first thinking you want to buy or start a business and you're trying to figure out, what can I afford? And the reason that time makes sense is because you want to figure out, is ROBS going to be part of my strategy? Because what you don't want to do is go out shopping for something that you're not prepared to pay for, right? You need to know what sort of range you're looking at in terms of size of business and what you can pay for it. The second time, which is really more critical, is that 60 to 90 days before you need to close your deal or have access to make your first investments with those funds. It usually only takes clients about 30 days to get their funds rolled over. The reason we say 60 to 90 days is because of a couple things. One, there are potential implications with the state that a client is in. So there are a few states that are as many as 8 to 10 weeks to get an entity filed, and that can really delay things. Business deals get delayed all the time. So starting early is a good opportunity to make sure you're not, in a bad spot. And then the third reason you'll want to start early is because current custodians are all different. So where your funds exist today can vary dramatically in how quickly you can get that money out. And you'll know a lot about this, Paul. There are some custodians that only do distributions for people once a month, and they will only do it if it's like Medicare health insurance company pristine paperwork. Like every T is crossed, every I is dotted perfectly. And if not, they'll reject it. And now you're on to the next thing for the next month.
Well, and they're incentivized to put extra barriers in the way, because if they delay $1 billion transferring by 2 weeks, that's a decent amount of interest and fees.
Yeah, you'll have to do the math on that, because I'm sure it's very compelling.
Yep. Well, this has been
Did I
perfect.
answer all your questions at the end? Because there was one other one you asked.
Oh, podcast.
Oh, the podcast.
Yes.
So the podcast is called Create the Life You Want. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. So just type in Create the Life You Want. You can type in my name, Jeremy Ames, with that, and it'll come up. What we do is we just interview clients and entrepreneurs who are in this small startup, franchise business, existing business under $6 million. And we just dissect, how did you even get into this? When did you have this idea? Where did it come from? How did you navigate all the complexities of getting a deal done? What kind of financing did you layer into your deal? We just pick apart whatever's interesting about this person's story. And we think about the journey from, hey, I'm in my corporate career doing something else, to actually, becoming a business owner.
So this is my recommendation. If you're considering this, download the guide, begin listening to Jeremy's podcast, and then 60 to 90 days out before your deal, make sure you're contracting with them so you have the funds available.
And I would just tell people, I'm on LinkedIn. If I'm not on any other social media, because I'm, I guess, old school, but I'm on LinkedIn. If you ever have any questions, you want to reach out, please, you can DM me on that. I publish stuff all the time about our clients, about Rollovers for business startups. I publish things just about business in general. I mean, I've had a pretty interesting front row seat of 30,000 businesses getting started, on top of, I've owned 3 different franchises and co-founded 5 different companies, and, bought a couple of existing businesses. So I've failed at a lot of stuff and succeeded at a couple.
And you are prolific in your LinkedIn posts. Every post is valuable and worth reading, at least all the ones I've read. So
yeah, all 4 of them.
Yeah, both of them, they were great. So with that, I think we got to have you back in a little bit, maybe a little shorter episode, talking about, as business owners get successful, you start getting pulled into the business due to opportunity, and how do you stay back far enough to still have a family, a life, your health, all of which you've managed incredibly well.
Do I got to save that for the next episode?
You got to save it for the next one.
Okay. This is a personal passion of mine, because I think it is pointless. The saddest thing I see in the world is not people who go into business and fail. It's people who go into business and succeed financially, but are miserable. I think that is the biggest travesty of anything that can happen. And I do have some thoughts on both what I've seen and what I've done personally to not be in that place.
See, everyone, Jeremy is such a pro. He just gave me the teaser for his future episode. So we're going to look forward to having you back. Thank you so much for being here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul.
Everyone, so glad you could join me. Thank you for being here with Jeremy Ames and Guidant. Be sure to reach out to them. You can find more on them in the podcast description now. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, give us a positive review, or give us a negative review, and share the episode with someone you think might be able to benefit from having the freedom that comes with owning a business with capital already on their balance sheet in the 401k. Now, get back to living a great life.